My name is Kara Whitmore, and the first thing I heard at Thanksgiving dinner was my mother's laugh. Sharp, loud, and performative, the kind of laugh designed to get everyone's attention. She waved her wine glass like she was conducting an orchestra, her voice cutting through the conversations around the table. "Don't ask Kara about her job," she announced to the 14 people gathered in her dining room. "She cleans houses. It's sweet, I suppose." She said sweet, the way you might describe a child's crayon drawing, patronizing and dismissive at the same time. The laughter that followed felt like knives. Not everyone joined in. Some people looked uncomfortable, but enough did that my face burned with humiliation. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except sit there while my own mother made me the punchline of her joke. Then my 10-year-old son Tyler leaned closer to me and whispered, "Mom, is cleaning houses something you're supposed to be embarrassed about?" And just like that, the room tilted. The humiliation I'd been swallowing for years suddenly felt different. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. My child was learning shame from my own family. He was learning to look down on honest work because his grandmother had decided it wasn't worthy of respect. That moment, hearing the confusion and hurt in my son's voice, did something permanent inside me. It broke something that had been barely holding together. For 6 years, I'd tolerated my mother's comments about my little cleaning job. For 6 years, I'd smiled through her introductions that made me sound like a charity case. For 6 years, I'd let her treat me like I was failing at life. But watching Tyler learn to be ashamed of me, that was where I drew the line. That was the moment I decided this would be the last holiday my mother ever hosted where I sat silent and took her abuse. I looked around the table at the familiar faces. My older sister Alyssa sat at my mother's right hand, looking perfectly put together in her expensive suit. She was the success story, the one our mother bragged about constantly. Next to her sat her husband, then various aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd all heard some version of this same speech before. They'd all been told I was the disappointing daughter, the one who'd made bad choices, the one who'd had to move back home after her divorce with nothing but trash bags and a kid, the one who cleaned toilets for a living while everyone else had real careers. What none of them knew was that everything they believed about me was 6 years out of date. 6 years earlier, I'd shown up at my mother's doorstep at 2 in the morning. I had 2 trash bags full of clothes, a sleeping 4-year-old on my shoulder, and divorce papers that were still warm from the printer. My bank account held exactly $83. My pride was completely gone. My mother had opened the door in her bathrobe and hadn't even hugged me. She hadn't asked what happened or if we were okay. She just looked at Tyler sleeping against my shoulder, then at the trash bags, then at my face. And she'd pointed behind the house. "The garage studio is empty. You can stay there temporarily. Don't get too comfortable. Not welcome home. Not I'm glad you're safe. Not we'll figure this out together. Just terms and conditions. Just a reminder that this was charity, not family support. Just making sure I understood I was a burden." The studio was a converted garage that smelled like motor oil and had concrete floors. There was one small window and a space heater that barely worked. But it had a roof and a door that locked, which was more than I'd had 12 hours earlier when I'd finally worked up the courage to leave my ex-husband. So I'd swallowed my pride, what little remained of it, and said thank you. I'd made up the mattress on the floor for Tyler and tried not to cry while he slept. To pay for daycare and food, I started cleaning houses. Rich neighborhoods where people had more bathrooms than my entire apartment. I scrubbed toilets, scoured ovens, wiped baseboards, and polished floors until my hands were raw. The work was hard and my back ached constantly, but the pay was surprisingly good. People felt guilty about their messes and handed me checks that were bigger than what I'd made at my old office job. It was supposed to be temporary. That's what everyone said, including me. Just until I got back on my feet. Just until I found something better. Just until life went back to normal. Temporary. Funny how temporary lasted 6 years. Every holiday after that, my mother introduced me the same way. "This is my older daughter Alyssa. She's a corporate attorney in Chicago. Partner track. Very impressive. Applause. Pride. Beaming smile. Then she'd turn to me. And this is Kara. She helps people with their homes. The word helps made it sound like I was doing volunteer work or running errands. Like I wasn't actually earning a living. Like I wasn't supporting myself and my child. Every time I smiled and nodded. Every time something inside me died a little more. But I kept smiling because I didn't know what else to do. I kept accepting her narrative because I didn't have the energy to fight it. What nobody noticed, because nobody bothered to ask, was that I wasn't just cleaning houses. I was studying them. I was learning how wealthy people operated their homes. I was watching how short-term vacation rentals worked, how property managers handled multiple estates, how maintenance companies charged for services. I saw problems everywhere. I saw money leaking through poor management, neglected properties, and inefficient systems. I saw opportunities that nobody else seemed to notice. So at night, after Tyler fell asleep on our mattress on the floor, I started building something. Quietly. Secretly. I built a website at 1 a.m. using free templates and YouTube tutorials. I filed LLC paperwork on my phone while waiting in the daycare parking lot. I printed contracts at the public library and studied property management regulations in the books they had available. I named the company Northfield Home Services. It sounded bigger and more established than it was, which at first was just me and my beat-up Honda Civic full of cleaning supplies. But I'd learned something important while scrubbing rich people's toilets. Presentation matters. Confidence matters. If you act like you run a professional company, people treat you like you run a professional company. 1 client became 3. 3 became 8. 8 became 15. The work kept growing. Soon I wasn't the one scrubbing toilets anymore. I was hiring other people to scrub toilets. I was scheduling cleaning teams and coordinating maintenance workers. I was managing entire vacation rental properties from check-in to check-out. I was handling repairs and upgrades and dealing with difficult tenants. I'd stopped being the help. I'd become the boss. But I didn't tell anyone in my family. Why would I? They'd already decided who I was. They'd already written my story and cast me as the failure. Telling them I was building a business would just invite more skepticism and judgment. Besides, they never asked. Not once in 6 years did my mother or sister ask about my work beyond those dismissive comments about helping people or cleaning houses. They didn't want to know the details because the details didn't matter to them. They'd made up their minds about me, and nothing I said was going to change that. So I let them believe what they wanted to believe. I let them think I was still scrubbing toilets and barely getting by. I let them pity me and look down on me and make their little jokes at family gatherings. And I kept building my company in secret, 1 property at a time, 1 client at a time, 1 small victory at a time. By year 5, everything had changed, but only for me. To my family, I was still the same struggling single mom who cleaned houses. They had no idea that Northfield Home Services now employed 12 people. They didn't know I was managing 30 vacation properties across the county. They hadn't seen my small office downtown or the company trucks with my logo painted on the sides. They didn't know that my revenue had crossed 7 figures that year. They didn't know Tyler no longer slept on a mattress on the floor. We had our own small house now. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. They didn't know he told his classmates, "My mom runs a business," with pride in his voice. That sentence alone, hearing my son describe what I did with confidence instead of shame, healed something inside me that I hadn't even realized was broken. My mother and sister were still stuck in the past, still operating on 6-year-old information, still treating me like I was barely surviving. And I let them because their opinion of me didn't matter anymore. I knew the truth about my life. Tyler knew the truth. That was enough. Or at least I told myself it was enough. Until Thanksgiving came, and my mother decided to invite a special guest to dinner. My mother had been buzzing with excitement all morning. She'd gotten her hair done at an expensive salon. She'd brought out the good china, the stuff she usually kept locked in the dining room cabinet. She was roasting 2 turkeys like the governor was coming to visit. "Very important guest tonight," she kept saying to anyone who would listen. Big investor. Owns half the county. Very successful man. She said successful the way most people say royalty. With reverence and awe. I didn't care about her important guest. I'd brought the pies like I always did, helped set the table like I always did, and prepared myself for the usual awkward dinner where I'd smile politely while my mother compared me unfavorably to Alyssa. When the doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, my mother practically ran to answer it. I heard her greeting someone with enthusiasm that bordered on embarrassing. Then I heard a man's voice. Calm, polite, familiar. My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. They walked into the dining room together, my mother practically glowing with pride at having landed such an impressive dinner guest. And there he was. Daniel Reeves, tall and composed in an expensive suit, shaking hands with my relatives like this was a political fundraiser. Daniel Reeves. My biggest client. The man who owned 11 properties that I personally managed. My mother was introducing Daniel to everyone. Her voice pitched higher than usual with excitement. This is my daughter Alyssa, the attorney. And her husband Michael. And my sister Ruth. And this is... She worked her way around the table, making sure to mention everyone's accomplishments and credentials. Then she got to me and Tyler sitting quietly in the corner. And this is my younger daughter Kara and her son Tyler. Kara does housekeeping. She said it dismissively, ready to move past me quickly to avoid dwelling on her disappointment of a daughter. Daniel smiled politely at everyone, and when his eyes landed on me, I saw a flicker of recognition. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded and let my mother continue her tour of the dinner guests. Kara, sweetheart, could you grab Mr. Reeves's coat? My mother said, gesturing toward the door. Like I was the hired help. Like it was my job to take coats and serve drinks. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here was Daniel Reeves, a man who just signed a 2-year contract extension worth hundreds of thousands of dollars with my company. A man whose properties I knew inside and out because I managed every detail of them. And my mother was asking me to grab his coat like I was a servant. I stood up calmly and took his coat, hanging it in the closet while my mother seated Daniel at the place of honor next to her. Dinner started with wine flowing and conversation filling the room. My mother was in her element, playing the gracious hostess, making sure everyone noticed how important her guest was. She kept steering the conversation back to Daniel's real estate investments and business ventures, clearly hoping to impress him with her family. So proud of Alyssa, she announced at one point, raising her glass. She's on partner track at her firm. Top of her class at law school. 6-figure salary. She beamed at my sister, who smiled modestly and accepted the praise like it was her due. Then my mother's gaze shifted to me. Her smile changed, became tighter, more forced. And then there's Kara. Our little Cinderella. She said it like it was endearing, but everyone in the room knew it wasn't. Still cleaning houses after all these years. The laughter that followed was loud and genuine. Adults who should have known better actually laughed at their relative being mocked at the dinner table. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral. Tyler's hand tightened around mine under the table. Mom, he whispered. Why does Grandma say it like that? Like it's funny. My chest felt like it was burning from the inside out. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I did something I'd been too afraid to do for 6 years. I stood up. Slowly, calmly, the way you stand when you already know you've won. Sweetheart, I said to Tyler, speaking loud enough for the whole table to hear me clearly. There's nothing wrong with cleaning houses. Honest work is good work. You should never be ashamed of earning a living. Then I turned to look at my mother directly. But that's not actually what I do anymore. The room went silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Everyone was looking at me now, probably expecting me to storm out or start crying or do something emotional and dramatic that would confirm their opinion of me as unstable. My mother laughed nervously. Oh honey, please don't make a scene. We're just having fun. You're so sensitive. I own Northfield Home Services, I said calmly, cutting her off. I wasn't loud or emotional. I was simply stating facts. Beat of silence. I manage 43 vacation properties and estates across the county. Another beat. I employ 16 people full-time and have a rotating staff of contractors. Another beat. And this year we passed $3.1 million in revenue. You could have heard a pin drop. The silence was so complete that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded deafening. Everyone stared at me like I just announced I was actually a secret agent or a movie star, like the person they thought they knew had been replaced by someone completely different. Then Daniel spoke up, his voice confused and slow. Wait, Kara Whitmore. He was looking at me with sudden recognition and surprise. He nodded. Yes. He blinked several times, processing this information. You're Northfield. You're the owner. His voice had changed completely from the polite dinner guest tone. Now he sounded genuinely stunned. Yes, I confirmed again. Daniel turned to look at my mother, and his entire demeanor shifted. The polite social mask dropped away, replaced by something between disbelief and disappointment. She runs my entire property portfolio, he said, his voice firm and clear. She manages 11 of my vacation rentals. She's the best property manager I've ever worked with. My mother had gone pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She's the reason my properties stay profitable and fully booked, Daniel continued. She's the reason I don't have to worry about maintenance issues or difficult tenants. She handles everything. He paused, then added quietly, You told me earlier when I arrived that your younger daughter was still figuring life out. Those were your exact words. The room seemed to fold in on itself. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Everyone was staring at my mother now, watching her realize that she'd been publicly humiliating her own daughter in front of her daughter's biggest client and most important business relationship. My mother tried to recover, but her voice came out weak and shaky. I didn't know. You never told me about any business. You said you were cleaning houses. I did clean houses, I interrupted calmly. 6 years ago when I started. But you never asked what I was doing now. You just assumed nothing had changed because that fit the story you wanted to tell about me. I kept my voice even, not angry, just stating facts. Alyssa was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. You own a company. A multi-million-dollar company. Yes. And you never told us. You never asked, I said simply. For 6 years, nobody in this family asked me a single question about my work beyond making jokes about scrubbing toilets. You all decided who I was and what my life looked like, and you never bothered to check if your assumptions were actually true. Tyler squeezed my hand tighter, looking up at me with pride in his eyes. That look was worth more than any apology my mother could have offered. Daniel was shaking his head in disbelief. I had no idea you were related. When you told me your family name was Whitmore, I never connected it to. He gestured vaguely at my mother. I never imagined this was the same family. Different worlds, I said quietly. And they were. My world was built on hard work and quiet competence. Their world was built on appearances and whose achievements sounded most impressive at dinner parties. Nobody seemed to know what to say. The cousins and aunts and uncles who'd been laughing minutes ago now looked uncomfortable and ashamed. They were realizing they'd joined in mocking someone who was actually more successful than most of them. My sister Alyssa, who'd always been held up as the golden child, looked particularly shaken. Her partner track position suddenly didn't seem quite as impressive when compared to someone who owned their own thriving business. My mother was struggling to process this new information. You could see her trying to figure out how to spin this, how to reframe the narrative so she didn't look like she'd been completely wrong about her own daughter for 6 years. But there was no way to spin this. The truth was too clear. Well, she finally said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Why didn't you tell us? We would have been so proud. We would have supported you. Would you? I asked quietly. Because 6 years ago when I showed up with nothing, You put me in the garage and told me not to get comfortable. You've spent every holiday since then introducing me as Kara who cleans houses with that apologetic tone like I'm an embarrassment. When exactly would you have been proud? My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. Because we both knew the answer. She wouldn't have been proud until I had something worth bragging about to her friends. And now that I did, she wanted to claim credit for it somehow. Wanted to rewrite history so she'd been supportive all along. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Kara, I apologize. I had no idea this was. I wouldn't have accepted the dinner invitation if I'd known it would put you in this position. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, like he'd accidentally walked into a family drama he wanted no part of. It's not your fault, I told him. You couldn't have known. I turned to my mother. He couldn't have known because you didn't know. And you didn't know because you never asked. People were starting to make excuses to leave. Someone mentioned a headache. Another couple suddenly remembered they had an early morning the next day. Within 10 minutes, the dining room that had been full of people was half empty. The ones who remained looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Tyler and I stood up. I picked up my purse and helped him into his jacket. We headed toward the door, ready to leave this dinner party and its uncomfortable revelations behind. Kara, wait. My mother's voice stopped us at the door. You're overreacting. We can talk about this. We can. I turned around slowly, and for the first time in 6 years I smiled at her. A real smile, not the fake polite one I usually wore at family gatherings. I'm not overreacting, I said gently. I'm graduating. I'm graduating from caring what you think about me. I'm graduating from these dinners where I'm treated like a failure. I'm graduating from a family that judges me instead of knowing me. And with that, Tyler and I walked out into the cold November night, leaving the disaster of Thanksgiving dinner behind us. The next 2 weeks were interesting. Daniel called me the Monday after Thanksgiving to apologize again, and to assure me that the awkward dinner wouldn't affect our business relationship. In fact, he said he was even more impressed knowing I'd built Northfield from nothing while raising a son alone. Most people with your background and resources would have given up, he told me. The fact that you turned house cleaning into a multi-million-dollar property management company shows the kind of determination and business sense that's rare. Then he did something unexpected. He referred me to 3 real estate developers he knew who were looking for property management services. They need someone who actually understands the work, not just someone with a fancy degree and no field experience. Within a week, I'd signed contracts with all 3 developers. My business had just doubled. Not because my mother finally acknowledged my success, but because I'd built something real that people could see and value. Tyler and I moved out of our small rental house into a real home. Nothing extravagant, but it had a yard and enough bedrooms that he didn't have to do his homework at the kitchen table anymore. He told his class during show and tell that his mom was a CEO. I got a call from his teacher saying how excited he'd been to share that. Meanwhile, my mother stopped hosting holiday gatherings. Apparently, after Thanksgiving, she couldn't face organizing another family dinner where everyone would remember how badly she'd misjudged her own daughter. Alyssa called me 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. We hadn't spoken since the dinner, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I should have said that at dinner, but I was too shocked. And then you left and I'm sorry for how we've treated you. For how I've treated you. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue. Mom called Daniel Reeves's office to try to salvage her relationship with him, Alyssa continued. She wanted to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd always been supportive of you. His assistant was very polite but made it clear he wasn't interested in maintaining a social relationship with her. I wasn't surprised. Daniel was a businessman who valued competence and honesty. My mother had demonstrated neither. I looked up your company, Alyssa said quietly. I saw the properties you manage, the reviews from clients, the size of your operation. You built something real, Kara. And we never even noticed. You never looked, I corrected. There's a difference between not noticing and not looking. You assumed you knew who I was based on where I started, not where I was going. Alyssa was quiet for a moment. You're right. I'm sorry. I appreciated the apology, but it didn't change 6 years of dismissive treatment. It didn't erase all the dinners where she'd sat next to Mom while I was mocked. Words were easy. Changed behavior was harder. Over the next few months, my business continued growing. The referrals from Daniel brought in more referrals. Property owners talked to other property owners. My reputation for reliability and professionalism spread through the local real estate community. I hired a full-time assistant and promoted one of my best property managers to operations director. Northfield wasn't just me anymore. It was a real company with systems and processes and a team of people who took pride in their work. Tyler thrived too. He was more confident at school, more willing to talk about our life without shame or embarrassment. He invited friends over to our house without worrying they'd judge where we lived. He'd learned an important lesson from watching me. Other people's opinions of you matter less than the truth of who you are. My mother sent cards and emails trying to rebuild the relationship. I responded politely but kept my distance. I didn't hate her, but I also didn't trust her. She'd spent 6 years treating me like a disappointment, and one awkward Thanksgiving dinner hadn't changed her fundamental character. She was still the woman who'd put me in a garage and told me not to get comfortable. She was still the woman who'd introduced me to her friends as her embarrassing daughter who cleaned houses. The difference now was that her opinion didn't have the power to hurt me anymore. I'd proven to myself that I could succeed despite her lack of support, despite her judgments, despite everything she thought about me. That was freedom. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I got an invitation to speak at a local business conference about building a company from the ground up. The organizers had heard about Northfield and wanted me to share my story with aspiring entrepreneurs. Almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my strength, and the idea of standing on stage talking about my journey made me uncomfortable. But then I thought about all the people out there who might be in the same position I'd been in 6 years ago. Starting from nothing, being judged by their families, wondering if they'd ever amount to anything. So I said yes. The day of the conference, I stood backstage waiting to go on, more nervous than I'd been in years. Tyler was in the audience with one of my friends. He'd insisted on coming to watch me speak. When I walked out on stage and saw the crowd of 200 people waiting to hear what I had to say, my first instinct was to panic. But then I saw Tyler in the third row, giving me a thumbs up with the biggest smile on his face. I took a breath and started talking. About showing up at my mother's house with trash bags. About cleaning toilets to pay for daycare. About building a company late at night when everyone thought I was just getting by. About learning that other people's opinions of you are just that. Opinions, not facts. The speech went better than I'd hoped. People laughed at the funny parts and leaned forward during the serious parts. When I finished, the applause was genuine and sustained. Several people came up afterward to shake my hand and ask questions about starting their own businesses. One woman, probably in her 50s, waited until everyone else had left. "Thank you," she said simply. "My family thinks I'm crazy for wanting to start a business at my age. Your story reminded me that their doubts don't define what I'm capable of." That moment, seeing that I'd helped someone else find their courage, made everything worth it. All the years of mockery, all the uncomfortable dinners, all the times I'd wanted to give up and just accept my mother's narrative about my life. I turned those painful experiences into something useful. I turned shame into strength. Tyler and I went out for ice cream after the conference. "You were amazing, Mom," he said, chocolate already smeared across his face. "Everyone was really listening to you." "It felt scary," I admitted. "But you did it anyway," he pointed out. "That's what brave means." Out of the mouths of 10-year-olds. He was right. Brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing the thing anyway, despite the fear, despite what other people thought, despite all the reasons it would be easier to stay quiet and small. A year after the Thanksgiving disaster, Northfield Home Services employed 23 people and managed 62 properties. We'd expanded into property maintenance and renovation consultation. My revenue had doubled again. I'd bought a building downtown to house our growing operations instead of renting space. Tyler was 11 now and already talking about wanting to work in the family business someday. Not right away, he assured me. But after college. I want to help build what you started. The idea of my son being proud to continue what I'd created, instead of ashamed of how I'd started, made everything worth it. That was the legacy I wanted to leave him. Not money or property or a company name, but the knowledge that you can build something meaningful from nothing if you're willing to work hard and ignore the people who doubt you. My relationship with my mother remained polite but distant. She'd finally stopped trying to rewrite history and accepted that I wasn't going to pretend the past 6 years hadn't happened. Alyssa and I had rebuilt some level of sisterhood, though it would never be what it might have been if she'd stood up for me earlier. But I'd learned something important. You don't need everyone's approval to build a good life. You don't need your family to believe in you before you start believing in yourself. You don't need anyone's permission to succeed. Daniel Reeves became more than a client. He became a mentor and friend. He introduced me to other business owners, invited me to real estate investment meetings, and gave me advice that saved me from several costly mistakes. You have good instincts, he told me once. Better than most people I know who went to fancy business schools. You learn by doing, by failing, by figuring it out. That's worth more than any MBA. He'd been at that Thanksgiving dinner by pure coincidence. My mother had met him at some charity event and invited him without knowing his connection to me. But that coincidence had changed everything. If he hadn't been there to confirm my success, would I have found the courage to speak up? I wanted to believe I would have eventually, but I wasn't sure. Sometimes we need a witness to give us the courage to tell our own truth. Sometimes we need someone else to say, yes, what she's telling you is real, before people will believe us. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. The irony was that I'd spent years thinking I needed my family to see my success before it would feel real. But when the moment finally came, when they finally saw what I'd built, it mattered less than I'd imagined. By then, I'd already proven it to myself. Their acknowledgement was just confirmation of what I already knew. 2 years after that Thanksgiving, my mother called me. Not an email, not a card, but an actual phone call. I've been thinking a lot about that dinner, she said after the awkward hellos. About how I treated you. Not just that night, but for years before that. I didn't say anything, just waited. I told myself I was being realistic, being practical. You'd made some bad choices with your ex-husband, and I thought you needed to hear hard truths. But I was wrong. I was cruel. And I'm sorry. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Thank you, I said, because that's what you say when someone apologizes. But I didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't. Some hurts don't heal just because someone says sorry. I know I can't undo what I did, she continued. But I want to do better. I want to actually know you, not the version of you I made up in my head. We started having coffee once a month after that. Slowly, carefully, we began building something new. Not the relationship we'd had before, that was gone forever, but something else. Something more honest, even if it was less comfortable. She met my employees and saw my office. She listened when I talked about business challenges instead of offering unsolicited advice. She told Tyler stories about me as a child that he'd never heard before. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. 3 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I stood in my new office building, looking out at the city where I'd once shown up with trash bags and $83. The sign outside read, Northfield Home Services. Property Management Excellence. I thought about the woman I'd been that night. Exhausted, ashamed, believing my mother's story about who I was and what I was capable of. I thought about all the toilets I'd scrubbed and floors I'd mopped while my family pitied me and made jokes at my expense. I thought about my son learning to be ashamed of me at that dinner table, and how that shame had transformed into pride. I thought about Daniel Reeves accidentally stumbling into our family drama and providing the outside validation that finally made my family see me clearly. But mostly, I thought about the moment I'd stood up at that table and spoken the truth. Not with anger or tears or drama, but with simple facts delivered calmly. Revenue numbers and employee counts and client names. The undeniable proof that I'd built something real while everyone assumed I was failing. That moment had changed everything. Not because it changed my family's opinion of me, but because it was the moment I stopped needing their opinion to define my worth. It was the moment I chose my own truth over their assumptions. Tyler walked into my office with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He was 14 now, somehow both a child and almost a young man. "Ready to go, Mom." We had dinner plans, just the two of us, something we did every week no matter how busy work got. These moments with him were what mattered most. Not revenue numbers or property counts or anyone else's opinion of my success. As we walked to the car, he said, "Remember that Thanksgiving when Grandma said you cleaned houses?" He nodded. "Hard to forget. I was so confused," he admitted. "I didn't understand why she said it like that, like it was something to be ashamed of. I remember you told me there was nothing wrong with cleaning houses." "There isn't," I confirmed. "I know that now," he said. "But I also know that's not the lesson you were actually teaching me that night." "Oh, what was the real lesson?" He thought about it for a moment. "That other people's opinions of you are just stories they tell themselves. And you don't have to accept their story as truth. You can know your own truth and live in that, even if everyone around you believes something different." I stopped walking and looked at my son, amazed at his understanding. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," he said simply. We got in the car and drove away from Northfield's offices, leaving behind another day of building the life I'd claimed for myself. The life my mother said I couldn't have. The life that started with trash bags and toilet brushes and grew into something nobody expected. I didn't ruin anyone's reputation. I didn't expose anyone publicly or seek revenge for how I'd been treated. I didn't yell or fight or demand apologies. I just told the truth at exactly the right moment, with the right witness present to confirm it. And sometimes that's the loudest revenge there is. Not destruction but truth. Not anger but facts. Not fighting to change someone's opinion of you, but living your truth so completely that their opinion becomes irrelevant. That Thanksgiving dinner was the last time my mother hosted a holiday where I sat silent and accepted her narrative about my life. After that, I wrote my own story. And it turned out to be a much better story than anyone had imagined.